By the end of this week, Jayden Daniels will be ready to take the next step for the Washington Commanders. I'm going to tell you why mandatory minicamp is going to prove it. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, and you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm your host, David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated, and I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I greatly appreciate you for coming through for today's episode. Everydayers, welcome back, and I appreciate you for coming through every day. Today's episode, we're going to talk about why we're saying no to the potential addition of two Hall of Fame left tackles to the Washington Commanders roster. We're going to talk about what the difference a year makes from this year's OTAs, wrapping up this year's OTAs from last year's OTA session. But first, we're going to start off by talking about why Jayden Daniels is ready to take the next step as the Washington Commanders starting quarterback, and why I believe this rookie or this mandatory minicamp this week will prove that once and for all. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. After today's episode, if you want to discuss anything that we talked about or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you have to do is text me by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. Sign up to be a Locked On Commanders Insider today and text me whatever it is Washington Commanders related that you want to talk about outside of the show. But not only that, you're also going to get direct messages from me, sometimes live messages during practices, during press conferences, during games. You're going to get bonus content. You're going to get all kinds of fun stuff, a lot of interaction that goes beyond the scope of the daily program here at Locked On Commanders. So again, go to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders to get in on that fun today. Jayden Daniels has done a lot of good things as a rookie quarterback for the Washington Commanders, and he's impressed a lot of people, but he is still taking the quote-unquote number 2 reps during the OTA practices all the way up through the end of the OTA practices. Now, this minicamp, this mandatory minicamp coming up, I don't necessarily expect that to change, but I think by the end of this mandatory minicamp, while we're waiting to go into training camp, I think everybody watching is going to be able to look at Jayden Daniels and say, yes, he is ready to be the starting quarterback in training camp. And that is the number one question that I think we need answered, or we need to go seek an answer for during the mandatory minicamp coming up this week. So we're scheduled to be in Ashburn this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for mandatory minicamp practices. So that is the number one question of 3 questions that I have here that I want to have answered by the end of this thing. And already I think you're seeing signs of Jayden Daniels being ready to take the reins as a starting quarterback in the National Football League. You've already heard players like Jonathan Allen talk about his being the first in the building, beating everybody in, whether it's to work out, get treatment, watch film, whatever it is, for him to go ahead and prepare. You've heard the coaches talk about how impressive he is as a mature player and as a quarterback, commanding the huddle, commanding the team, and being that leadership presence on the field and inside the roster. You've heard other teammates talk about how impressed they've been at his command of the offense, of his ability to kind of look like a veteran in the way that he knows the checks, he knows the signals, and all these other things. And certainly there have been some discussions about how this system isn't necessarily designed to be the most complex in the world, but it's not exactly oversimplified either, because if you oversimplify the scheme, the opponent, the defense that you're facing, is going to figure it out just as quickly as your rookie quarterback. So not to take anything away from Jayden, it may not be rocket science times calculus times, you don't even know, quantum physics, but it is absolutely still an NFL offense, and it's something that Jayden Daniels is taking control of very, very well early on. And then we see him in his first look at 11 on 11s, at least the first look to the media, and he looks comfortable. He's making his reads. He's finding spots in the zone to put the ball. Most importantly, he's making smart decisions. And what I really liked about Jayden Daniels that we saw in his first 11 on 11 session in front of media, that I pointed out to another member of the media, there was a moment during the practice where there's a pass rusher that got in very, very clean on him, and Jayden Daniels reacted to that pressure. He didn't stand in there because, again, he doesn't have pads on. He's wearing the gold jersey. He knows, everybody knows, he can't be touched. He can't be hit. he can't even be breathed on too aggressively, or else that player, that defensive player, is going to get in a lot of trouble. And I've seen NFL practices, I've seen Senior Bowl practices, in college practices, where these quarterbacks who know they can't be hit kind of steer into that a little bit. And even in the face of pressure, they just stand there. They don't try to avoid it. They don't react to it. They don't throw in relation to that pressure. They just kind of stand there. And sometimes they let the defender run by. And yeah, it's a practice sack. And yeah, okay, that guy can say, oh man, I would have got you. I would have got you. But the quarterback stands in there and he delivers the ball just like he would any other time. Jayden Daniels, on the other hand, when there is pressure, he's responding to that pressure. He's throwing in the context that's being presented to him. He's not ignoring the context, ignoring the repercussions, and saying, okay, well, you can't hit me for real this time, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this, because that's the whole idea of practice. You perform the way that you practice. So Jayden Daniels practicing like a quarterback under pressure when he is under pressure, to me, is another sign of that maturity, another sign of how much he really loves competing in this game. He doesn't care if you can't hit him. If there's pressure there, he's going to try to beat it by doing the best he can, get the ball out, give his guys an opportunity to make plays, which is exactly what we saw during the 11-on-11 session. I expect in this week's mandatory minicamp, we're going to see more of those decisions. There's going to be mistakes. I guarantee you almost there's going to be an interception or two or three during this week's practices. But I'm confident that we're going to see more control of that offense. We're going to see more control on the field, more comfortability inside the pocket against that defense. And we're going to see all the signs that we need as media members to go ahead and say, this dude is ready to take the starting reins when training camp comes around in July. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily expect Dan Quinn to come out and say that. I don't expect Cliff Kingsbury to come out and say that. And I don't know that I necessarily expected to start training camp with Jayden Daniels being QB1. But during this period between minicamp and training camp, I think we're going to have a lot of opportunity to discuss Jayden Daniels being ready to be the starter and what that might look like for the Washington Commanders. Question number 2, I want to know, and I want to figure out for you, who the other favorites are in some of these camp battles. Now, with Marcus Mariota and Jayden Daniels, I don't know that we consider it necessarily a camp battle, so to speak. It's more so Marcus is holding the spot till Jayden is ready. But there are some battles out there. Safety, specifically free safety. Quan Martin seems to be pretty comfortable in that spot, seems to be pretty consistent as that number 1 free safety next to Jeremy Chin. Derek Forrest, I kind of expected there to be a competition. I want to start seeing, is he going to make this competition? Are the coaches going to allow this to be a little bit of competition, or is this really Quan Martin's job to necessarily lose? At cornerback, much more even of a competition. Emmanuel Forbes against Michael Davis. I think that's kind of a toss-up right now for the coaching staff. I don't think either guy necessarily has the advantage, though I have seen Emmanuel Forbes with Benjamin St-Juste in that quote-unquote first-team defense more often than Michael Davis. These next 3 days are going to give us some good insight into that. Wide receiver, Luke McCaffrey versus De'Ami Brown. Which one of these guys is going to take the step to be the solidified number 3 by the end of minicamp? I think it's going to be Luke McCaffrey, but I never want to sell out De'Ami Brown. De'Ami Brown has shown time and time again, the dude's got skills, the dude's got talent. So I don't think that he's going to go down without a fight. And then at tight end, John Bates versus Ben Sinnett. I told you guys before, I think by the end of training camp, Ben Sinnett's going to be tight end number 2. However, can he make himself tight end number 2 by the end of minicamp? We got 3 days to take a look at him and that position battle. And then finally, the third question is another position battle, but it deserves its own question all by itself. Which left tackle is going to be the starting left tackle? I think eventually Brandon Coleman is going to be that guy. Again, if it's Cornelius Lucas to start, it's not necessarily a battle between the two. Long term, it's more so the vet will hold the spot until the rookie is ready. Can Brandon Coleman show by the end of this mandatory minicamp that he's ready to be that left tackle at the start of training camp? I'm not as confident there as I am with Jayden Daniels as the quarterback. So those are our 3 questions that we want to answer by the end of this minicamp. Is Jayden Daniels truly ready to be the starting quarterback of the Washington Commanders for training camp, to enter training camp? I believe he'll prove that. Number 2, we got a bunch of camp battles to look for. And then number 3, the ultimate camp battle this season, the left tackle position. We're going to open the mailbag next. And to start, I'm going to tell you something that might shock your senses a little bit. And that's that the biggest difference between OTAs this year and last year is that this year, it's all about the team. That coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit a ball out of the ballpark. Game 3 of the NBA Finals will be Wednesday night. as the series shifts to Dallas, and the Mavericks trail the Boston Celtics 2-0 after getting beat, of course, in those first 2 games. In Boston Celtics have been favored the entire way, but the Dallas Mavericks are 1.5-point favorites at home for the first time in the NBA Finals. In the NHL, entering Monday night Stanley Cup Finals Game 2, the Florida Panthers were 1.5-goal favorites to win that game, and there was a 30% profit boost available for any 3 or more leg game parlay, same game parlay bet that you put on FanDuel.com. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, make sure you come back tomorrow. We will have observation and news from our first day of mandatory minicamp here this season. In the meantime, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without any of the drama and the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Opening the mailbag, we're going to talk about team here a little bit. Daniel came through, Insider Daniel said, for the mailbag, what is the biggest difference you've noticed in OTAs from last year? And Daniel, the biggest difference this year is that it's all about the team, which I know sounds strange because, again, we're talking about the ultimate team sport here in the NFL. The NFL is the only pro sports league where you can't just have 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 very good players and be a championship contending team. You got to have more. You got to have way more than that. You can't just have 3 guys and then a bunch of average players. You got to have more talent than that. But it's amazing how sometimes things are not about the team. Case in points. I got a YouTube comment. We got a YouTube comment recently. And there's nothing wrong with the comment. We're going to talk about it here. But we got a YouTube comment recently saying that it was weird to this person how we as a group, as a Commanders circle, fans, community, media, whatever, got to hear way more last year from Eric Bieniemy, assistant head coach and offensive coordinator, and quarterback Sam Howell compared to this year with Cliff Kingsbury, offensive coordinator, Joe Witt Jr., defense coordinator, and quarterback Jayden Daniels. But the truth of the matter is, and I actually polled some other media members just to make sure I was right. I went through my emails to look for transcripts. I polled some other media members to make sure that I wasn't lying to you guys here. The truth is, we got Eric Bieniemy at his intro press conference. We got him once during rookie camp, and we got him once during OTAs. We got Sam Howell last year once during OTAs up to this point. Then this year, we got each coordinator at their intro press conference, and then we also got each of them during the OTAs this year. So we got them twice at this point this year, whereas last year at this point, we'd gotten Eric Bieniemy 3 times because of rookie minicamp. That's pretty much it. If we, in fact, got him during rookie minicamp, but I'm pretty sure we got him during rookie minicamp. So even if we got him 3 times versus 2 times these other coordinators, that's not that big of a difference. As far as the quarterback is concerned, guys, we've interviewed Jayden Daniels 4 times in less than 2 months, right? He was drafted at the end of April. We're not even to the end of June yet. So end of May is 1 full month. End of June is 2 full months. We've interviewed Jayden Daniels 4 times, once on draft night via Zoom, once on day 2 of the draft in the auditorium before day 2 started for his introductory press conference, once during rookie minicamp and once during OTAs. So we've interviewed Jayden Daniels 4 times. This time last year, we got Sam Howell once. Now, we did get Sam Howell during Eric Bieniemy's introductory press conference, so I guess that counts as 1 as well. But I think what is happening here is basically a Washington Commanders' very own Mandela effect, because when you look at the major storylines that we all had to track last year, and I'm talking about media and fans alike, the major storylines last year were Sam Howell, Eric Bieniemy, the offensive line changes, defensive dominance expectations, right? Remember, we all expected the defense to carry the water, and Sam Howell just needed to play average or better, right? It turns out a whole lot different. And then basically Emmanuel Forbes and a hint of Quan Martin. Those were your major storylines last year. There was a little bit of what does Ron Rivera have to do to keep his job? But when you look at the storylines this year, you've got Adam Peters and Dan Quinn coming in. You've got Jayden Daniels. You got major roster turnover. Within that major roster turnover, you've got new leaders on the roster. Zach Ertz, Bobby Wagner. You've got guys like Frankie Louvu who are expected to be kind of the future leaders of this team. Jonathan Allen, is he going to be bought in or is he not going to be bought in? Deron Payne, is he going to bounce back? Dorrance Armstrong, is he finally going to shine his opportunity? Jamin Davis moving to the end. You got a complete defensive rebuild. Those legitimate camp battles that we just got done talking about. Every coach likes to say there's competition at every position. But let's be honest, guys, last year, where was the competition, right? New coordinators and scheme changes are here. And that's, again, the EB last year, but new coordinators and scheme changes, new exciting position coaches to get excited for this year. Mike Sainristil, Brandon Coleman, Luke McCaffrey, Jordan McGee, way more rookies to be excited about, to talk about this year than last year. And then, of course, again, you have the offensive line. So I think really what's happening, if you're having this perception that, man, we're not hearing from the coordinators as much this year as we are last year, we're not hearing from Sam Howell or from Jayden Daniels as much as we did Sam Howell last year. I think the reality is we're not talking about Jayden Daniels as much as we're talking about Sam Howell. And certainly Jayden Daniels getting a fair amount of press. I don't think anybody's neglecting him by any means. But I think arguably last year, almost on a daily basis, it was Sam Howell, something, Eric Bieniemy, something. And this year, it's much more of a holistic look at the team. We're even talking about kickers, right? And granted, that storyline is not exactly a good one, but we're talking about literally every part of this organization. I mean, I've gotten mailbag questions about an assistant GM. Last year, nobody could care less about the assistant GM. And what those duties were. I've gotten questions about scouting directors this year. I've got, questions about college personnel directors and all this other stuff. This year, you're focused as fans. We are focused as media, and the team is focused as a team on the team. Whereas last year, it was a very narrow focus of what we wanted to talk about. And they were very individualistic topics. Like, we really weren't talking about how everything interconnected with each other the way that we are this year. So I think that's really the reason that people are feeling that maybe this year we're not getting as much access to some of these people, is because we have so many different things to talk about that we don't necessarily have to come back and talk about the same topics in different ways throughout the season. Now, I promise, from the end of minicamp this week to the beginning of training camp in July, you're probably going to hear some storylines and be like, bro, I am tired of talking about this. We need to get training camp started right away. I know some of my insiders are already ready to get training camp underway. So I think that luster is probably going to wear off a little bit. You're probably going to start to notice, like, okay, now we're talking about kind of the same things over and over again, just in different ways. That's the nature of the beast this time of year. But I promise you, here at Locked On Commanders, we're going to do our best to keep it varied, keep it different, keep it exciting as much as we can while we wait on news to happen. Because unfortunately, guys, from mid-June to end of July, the only news coming out usually is bad news. So we don't want a whole lot of new news. We want to keep the same news, but just talk about it in different angles. That's where the challenge comes for us here as we keep this thing going. Speaking of frustration and trying to keep things going, Trent Williams is reportedly growing unhappy with his deal in San Francisco. But as much as fans will want to see him come back to Washington or Washington go back after him, I don't see it happening. We're going to talk about that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, decided to do a little bit of an impromptu mailbag. Usually our mailbags are Wednesday, but because of minicamp, we've got a Tuesday practice. So obviously we'll talk about that for our Wednesday episode. Wednesday practice for Thursday, Thursday practice for Friday. So I said, hey, insiders, let's go ahead and do a mailbag here for Tuesday ahead of the mandatory minicamp. Let's talk about that. And then again, I brought you 3 questions that I'm hoping to be able to bring back to you Friday. That is my plan. I want to take those 3 questions we started the episode with today, and that basically is going to be our outline for Friday's episode. I want to answer all 3 of those questions for you. I've already made some predictions on what the answers are going to be, but now I want to be able to answer those as definitively as possible Friday. So make sure you come back for that, if not every single day, like our everydayers, which of course we always approve of, or we always appreciate. But Merle came through with a 2-pack of left tackle questions that we're going to tackle here. Merle starts off, says, reports coming out of San Francisco is that Trent Williams is not happy with his contract, wants a new one. Should the Commanders explore that? So let's talk about this. So first and foremost, right off the bat, I don't think that the Washington Commanders are going to explore it. Whether they should or not is a little bit different circumstances. I think every single fan of this team is going to say, of course you pursue Trent Williams. He's a future Hall of Famer. The dude is still near or at the top of his position in the league, all these other things. And you can't argue with any of those things. But what I will tell you is the main reason I don't see this happening is because of the way the Washington Commanders have been trying to build this team. So the report about Trent Williams came from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN and said that, quote, there are whispers around some in the industry that Williams might want a new deal eventually, end quote. So that means not this season, right? That basically means this is not happening this season. So the earliest that this quote unquote whisper rumor is going to come to a head is 2025 offseason, with Williams set to turn 37 years old next summer or next spring. His current contract with the 49ers is not set to expire until 2026, when he's going to be turning 38 years old. So even if Trent Williams doesn't want to play for the 49ers under his new deal, the 49ers don't have to move him or do anything with him or let him leave until at the earliest 2026, when he's going to be 38 years old. And by that time, the Washington Commanders certainly hope that they will have their left tackle situation solved. If they don't have their left tackle situation, the idea of going and trying to trade for a left tackle who, remember, he signed a record-setting deal at one point. Now I think it's the fourth-ranked left tackle average earnings, but even the fourth-ranked average earnings for a left tackle is still pretty high numbers. If you're going and getting that guy even next offseason, if this thing comes to a head, then obviously things didn't go well this season, but that doesn't give you a long-term solution at the position. There's certainly going to be a case made for, that's great, put the Hall of Famer in there for now, develop a rookie behind him or whatever it is for the future, and worry about that later. And I'll totally understand that if that time comes. But again, right now is not the time for that conversation, because this is a down the road maybe conversation that is going to be had. That's not a 2025 conversation. So no, Trent Williams is not going to be coming available, at least from the current information that we have this offseason or this preseason. So no, I don't see that happening. So down the road, again, never say never. But even with that, Adam Peters, like if Brandon Coleman doesn't work out, I foresee potentially a first-round pick next year going to that position. If Brandon Coleman shows promise, then they're going to want to give him more cracks at it. They're not going to want to just put him on the bench in year two. Now, if the team feels they're a left tackle away from being title contenders, they don't have that guy, like I said, and Williams is still that dude, then never say never. But entering into 2027, unless the 49ers just kind of blow it up, like if they feel like their window is still open, Trent Williams feels like that window is still open, I don't anticipate anything other than them doing 1-year deals to try to get him a ring. So again, it's just going to take a lot to pry them away. Plus, again, the saltiness of the organization, like he wouldn't even talk to Ron Rivera about potentially staying here, even though he really wasn't involved in everything that transpired to take him there. So I don't know that Trent would have any interest in returning anyway. But Merle also asked about Jason Peters. Said, I know that he's old, but would it be crazy to bring him in for a workout during minicamp? He didn't play bad with the Seahawks last season. At worst, put him on the practice squad. Would it be crazy to bring Jason Peters in for a workout during minicamp? No. Do I think it's going to happen? No. Do I think they should do it? No, I don't. Jason Peters turns 43 at the end of the season, turns 43 in January, so he's 42 right now. He didn't join the Seahawks last year until midway through the 2023 NFL season, and he finished with an overall 53.9 blocking grade, total blocking grade, despite having a 71.2 run blocking grade. So when you have a 71.2 on one project and your GPA is 53.9, that means your second project didn't go very well. 3 times out of the 8 games he played last year for the Seahawks, Jason Peters finished with a 50.3 or worse pass blocking grade, according to PFF. His last 2 seasons have been his worst graded pass blocking years of his career. He dropped from a 77.9 overall grade in 2021, which is solid, to a 62.5 in 2022, which is not solid, to a 45.1 in 2023, which is bad. If you're bringing in a veteran left tackle, it's not because you don't trust the guys on your roster already to run block. It's because you don't trust them to protect your quarterback. Jason Peters, unfortunately, as a pass protector, has been on the decline for a few years now. I don't see that really getting better with Brandon Coleman, Cornelius Lucas, Trent Scott already on the roster. Honestly, given that current trend of performance, I don't think any of the 3 could do worse. If they do worse, it's not going to be much worse, or it's going to be basically the same. And you're giving cracks to younger guys. Brandon Coleman is a guy that, look, eventually his first live rep in the NFL is going to be his first live rep in the NFL. Like you can't, there's no way to basically take this guy and say, okay, we're going to put you in for your first rep in the NFL as a 10-year vet. Like you can't do that. His first rep's got to be his first rep. Eventually he's got to face live bullets. I would not be surprised to see Brandon Coleman, at least in the first preseason game of the year, play with the second team. Cornelius Lucas start with the first team, because you want that veteran stability, or at least what you expect to be stability. Let Brandon Coleman go out there, get his first NFL live bullets against a backup defense. Let him go out there and go against a second stringer, whatever it is. Or if they start Marcus Mariota, put Brandon Coleman in with the starters, go throw him in the deep end and say, hey, go get in deep, but understand our franchise future is not behind you. So there's a little bit less pressure in there. No offense to Marcus Mariota. Cornelius Lucas comes in with the second team, but he's protecting the franchise future. Which one's more important? I would argue that Cornelius Lucas' role in that scenario is more important than Brandon Coleman's. But again, you get Brandon Coleman his first live reps without risking your quarterback, right? So again, that's conversation for later. But if this team is not confident in their left tackles, I think you're much more likely to see a guy like David Bakhtiari or something like that come in. And at this point in time, as far as for the mini camp, I don't see anybody coming in. Again, if there's an injury or something like that, maybe somebody gets called in. Knock on wood, that doesn't come to fruition. But even then, I think they've got a pretty good class of tackle that they feel pretty good, whether we on the outside agree with them completely or not. So good questions. Certainly don't want to try to diminish anything these Hall of Famers are doing. Obviously, Trent Williams is at the top of the game. Look, if Trent Williams was available like right now, totally different discussion. But I don't think Trent Williams is available right now. I don't think he'll be available until the earliest the offseason of 2026. So that's the reason I basically take the stance there that I do. So great questions. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to have practice observations from the first day of mandatory minicamp. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, drop them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.